Good morning, I'm Adam Sexton. We've said it before, we'll probably say it again in the weeks and months ahead. There's a lot going on in Washington as the Trump administration seeks to remake the federal bureaucracy. Here this morning to discuss that and more, Representative Chris Pappas. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Adam. Good to be with you.
So these federal layoffs that we're seeing, what is the impact that you've seen so far in your district?
Well, look, I think that the effort of DOJ to move quickly and break things is maybe successful in that regard, but it's a failure when it comes to lowering costs for Granite Staters and for the American people, and to ensure that we have an accountable government that's working for people each and every day. I worry about a number of services within the federal government. We've had a number of aviation disasters recently. I'm on the Transportation Committee. We've been working to try to find ways to create that pipeline of air traffic controllers and aviation safety specialists that can help us keep our skies safe. But if we have a hiring freeze in place, if we're not able to get people trained up and in these positions, then the American people suffer. We've heard about people at VA being fired in their probationary period, even individuals that are working in the call centers for the Veteran Crisis Line losing their jobs. So when it comes to the core functions of government, we've got to make sure that we have the best people there who are committed to the mission of government. There is room to have a conversation around waste, fraud, and abuse. I hope we can continue to have that on a bipartisan basis. But the efforts of DOJ have been incredibly destructive when it comes to the ability of government to deliver critical services. We've got a high vacancy rate in a number of areas, just like we do in our state government right now. And so for those really critical areas that ensure that there's a good experience for the taxpayer, providing good customer service, we've got to make sure that we're sensible about how we move forward and hire up.
We're hearing from some of these laid-off employees, one an Iraq and Afghanistan veteran who had worked at the VA and transferred to the IRS and was in that probationary period, received a unsigned email citing performance issues and says his record was unblemished, but poof, he's gone.
And there are a number of others that took that fork in the road where they were going to, get paid through the fall and then take an early retirement, not show up at the office, who have been caught up in that. Was the administration even legally able to offer that sort of deal for these workers? So it's deeply concerning. This is no way to run a government. We need professional processes. We need to make sure that there are guardrails for the administration. There's an important role for Congress to play in terms of oversight. In the committees that, on the committees that I serve on, Transportation and Veterans Affairs, I'm going to be really looking forward to the conversations that I have with the new department heads on this very issue. How do we make sure that we're not sacrificing services for our veterans? How are we keeping the American people safe? Our government employees do that, but if there's just this haphazard program of firing people willy-nilly, that's not providing good service for the taxpayers.
It's being reported that the Pentagon is pausing mass firings. We know for a long time the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard has almost been untouchable in your district. Do you have concerns that the cuts will come there too?
Well, there's been significant investment at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard, literally billions of dollars to build new dry dock space and rehabilitate that facility. I was there a couple weeks ago with New Hampshire's congressional delegation, cutting the ribbon on a new facility there. They've worked to hire up because the demand on our ability to have rehabilitated submarines is going to continue to increase over time. We know the threats are there to America and our national security, so those workers are critically important. We're going to continue to work with union leaders and advocates at the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard to make sure those workers are protected. But I do feel that the efforts of the administration will have a chilling effect on those that want to pursue public service and want to work in one of these fields where we need them to be able to deliver good services to make sure this country is strong and prepared for the future.
You haven't used these terms this morning, but other Democrats are saying what Elon Musk is doing is, quote, illegal and unconstitutional. Do you believe Musk and DOJ have broken any laws?
Yes. And you've seen more than 75 court cases proceed. There have been at least a dozen injunctions. The administration has been laughed out of court for several of the actions they've taken, including trying to cancel birthright citizenship, which is something that's in the Constitution of the United States. So I don't believe this is any way to run a government. It's incredibly reckless and destructive. As I said before, if your goal is just to break government, they're doing a good job. But if your goal is to lower costs and to make government more efficient, this this isn't the way to do it. One of the first actions of the administration was to try to fire more than 15 inspectors general who are essentially the cops on the beat, the folks looking over the shoulders of administrations of both parties. They're nonpartisan. They help root out waste, fraud, and abuse. If you want to actually have a more efficient government, you would be relying on these people. You would be getting auditors in there, not teenagers and 20-somethings who are part of Elon Musk's group that are getting into data systems, and they really don't even know what they're taking a look at or what to look for. So this is not a really serious way to go about rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. I do believe they violated the law. I think the courts will continue to weigh in here, but I do believe in checks and balances. We have a Congress of the United States that has passed appropriations. That's the place where we should be having the conversation with the administration on how to achieve savings. We can do that as we negotiate bipartisan budget deals as we approach this March 14th government shutdown deadline. But we shouldn't be just giving away our authority to the executive branch to do it away from the public view and in violation of the law. I have those concerns.
Yeah, House Republicans are looking to keep this momentum of DOGE going in their budget reconciliation package. The Senate is doing its own thing, clearly not a vote of confidence in your Republican colleagues there in the House. Do you think your Republican opponents, or your fellow colleagues there in the House, do you think they will be able to pass a budget reconciliation bill, or are the numbers going to fade away as controversy grows here?
I don't know. They're trying to do everything in one bill. They're trying to go it alone and not work with Democrats to try to craft a bipartisan bill that could, say, cut taxes for working families, make smart investments in the future of this country. What they're trying to do is to blow up the deficit by trillions of dollars by giving massive tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans while cutting vital programs. We expect to see major cuts be made to the SNAP program, nutrition assistance that many Granite Staters and Americans rely on. It's also good for our farmers, good for our local economies. They're planning to gut the Medicaid program. While we haven't seen the detail on that yet, any change in terms of how Medicaid is funded is going to result in thousands of individuals in New Hampshire losing their health insurance. It would be incredibly disastrous for our overall healthcare system and its ability to deliver care to people. So they're financing tax cuts on the backs of hardworking families by taking away people's health insurance. That is the wrong set of priorities for America, for our state. I'll continue to work against it. I hope that if this one-party-only effort to give tax breaks to the rich and cut vital programs, I hope when that falls apart, if it does, that there's space for a bipartisan conversation on how we can proceed together. I'll be ready to have those conversations when and if the reconciliation process, fails. This
separation of powers thing you've been talking about, when you see President Trump put out statements like, quote, "He who saves his country does not violate any law," borrowing from Napoleon Bonaparte there a little bit, and, quote, "Long live the king," in reference to himself. Do you, as a member of Congress, take him seriously?
I think many of his supporters take him seriously, and I think for any president to use that kind of rhetoric, it not only flies against centuries of our history, the fact that we were founded as a country against the tyranny of a monarch in Britain, but it also sets an example for future presidents. And I think we have limited executive power. We have co-equal branches of government. It's critically important that people from all political parties recognize that we don't have a king in this country. We have a president who should not be above the law. And this president in the past has acted like he's above the law. He's the first convicted felon to become president of the United States. And I worry about the damage that he's doing to our institutions and the precedent that will set for future presidents of the United States.
In January, you voted against legislation that would have made girls' sports for girls only at federally funded institutions and schools. We're seeing really more and more decisive polling on this issue, transgender sports, that is. New York Times now has it at 80%, the vast majority of people against transgender girls playing girls' sports. 67% of Democrats opposed. That sample size, almost 3,000 people, so it's not necessarily a rounding error or a margin of error type thing. You've been very successful in your political career being in touch with people and voters. Why are you and Democrats so far from the mainstream on this issue?
Well, I don't believe that Congress should be weighing in on this issue. I trust that parents and coaches and local athletic leagues can decide what's fair, can figure out how to ensure kids can play and that everyone is fair and safe in the process. But look, Congress struggles to do its very basic work. We're approaching a government shutdown deadline on March 14th. We should be focused on how we come together and solve problems and lower costs for the American people, not dealing with an issue that divides America, that is best left to those that have the expertise and are able to determine this issue at the local level. At one point in time, the Republican Party prided itself on being the party of local control, but at every turn, they want national one-size-fits-all approaches to issues that impact our communities and our families. I'm willing to let local officials decide what's best.
All right, Congressman Chris Pappas, thanks for joining us on Close Up. We'll see you here in a couple months.
Thanks, Adam.
Appreciate it. And we'll be right back with Manchester Mayor Jay Rouet and why he's not backing down on the bail issue. Stay with us.